While the world watches the Peng 3 dead in the Baltic Sea, the blueprint for this attack was actually perfected 2 years ago, 10 miles off the coast of China. To see the prototype of a modern digital blockade, we must look at the Matsu Islands. Sitting just 10 miles off the coast of mainland China, but governed by Taiwan, the Matsu archipelago is a geopolitical tripwire. In early 2023, its 14,000 residents relied on exactly 2 subsea fiber optic cables connecting them to the Taiwanese mainland. On February 2, 2023, the first cable went dark. Taiwanese authorities and the National Communications Commission identified the culprit as a Chinese-flagged fishing vessel that had crossed directly over the cable's coordinates. In the era of digital innocence, this was written off as a standard maritime hazard. Shallow waters and fishing nets are a notorious combination. But then, just 6 days later, on February 8th, the second cable was severed. This time, Taipei reported that automatic identification system tracking pointed to a Chinese cargo ship. While the freighter pulled the trigger, the ground had been prepared for years. A fleet of illegal Chinese sand-dredging ships had vacuumed the seafloor around Matsu, stripping away meters of protective silt and leaving the cables exposed as naked nerves on the bare seabed. 2 cables, cut by 2 different civilian vessels within a week. Are these isolated incidents? The result was a total blackout. For the residents of Matsu, the modern era abruptly ended. ATMs stopped dispensing cash. Hospital records could not be accessed. Cellular networks collapsed. The island was forced to rely on a microwave radio backup system that provided less than 25% of the island's necessary bandwidth. Though, for the 14,000 civilians, the usable speed felt like less than 5% as the military and government took priority. It took over 50 days for a specialized cable ship to finally arrive and repair the glass veins. For military strategists in Washington and Taipei, the Matsu incident was a terrifying revelation. It was a dry run. It proved that bad actors could effectively isolate a sovereign territory, blinding it and cutting off its economy, without ever triggering a conventional international response. They used the chaotic, unregulated cover of commercial shipping to execute an intentional disruption. Once the tactic was proven in the Pacific, it was exported to Europe. 8 months later, on October 8, 2023, the theater shifted to the Gulf of Finland. At 1:20 a.m., seismologists in Norway detected a distinct acoustic tremor on the seabed. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of the Baltic Connector, a massive subsea natural gas pipeline, being violently ripped open. In the exact same window of time, 2 vital telecom cables, the ELISA cable connecting Finland to Estonia and the EE-S1 connecting Sweden to Estonia, were severed. When the Finnish National Bureau of Investigation sent underwater drones down to the pipeline, they didn't find the remnants of highly advanced or restricted equipment. Resting in the mud, deep inside a massive drag trench, they found a 6,000-kilogram anchor. The forensic trail led directly to the NewNew polar bear, a Hong Kong-flagged container ship that had been sailing from Kaliningrad to St. Petersburg. AIS data proved the massive ship had sailed directly over the infrastructure at the exact moment of the ruptures. When authorities eventually tracked the ship down weeks later as it sailed through Russian Arctic waters, photographs revealed it was missing its port-side anchor. The NewNew polar bear established the blueprint for the gray zone stalemate. NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Keith Blount and other maritime experts testified that dragging a 6-ton anchor at 7 to 11 knots creates immense hydrodynamic drag and mechanical vibration. They argued a captain would have to try really hard to not notice the massive strain on the engines and the strange handling of the ship. Forensic seabed mapping in the Baltic revealed a continuous trench stretching for over 100 miles. In August 2024, China submitted a report to European ministries acknowledging the NewNew polar bear caused the damage, but blamed severe storm conditions and bad seafaring. They maintained the anchor was dislodged by the elements and dragged accidentally. While intent is hard to prove, the captain, Wan Wenguosh, was arrested in May 2025. In February 2026, he pleaded not guilty in Hong Kong, sticking to the accidental defense, while prosecutors allege he failed to report the lost anchor or follow safety protocols. Because the vessel was commercial, and because the damage occurred in the legally complex exclusive economic zones of Finland and Estonia, the Western alliance was legally paralyzed. You cannot invoke international mutual defense treaties over an allegedly clumsy merchant captain exercising navigational rights, even if their anchor destroys sovereign seabed infrastructure. This is the grim reality of the 2026 threat landscape. The Matsu cables and the NewNew polar bear were the beta tests. They proved the legal loophole existed. They proved that if you drag a heavy enough piece of iron through the mud, you can theoretically break the back of the Western infrastructure and simply sail away under the shield of plausible deniability. It was this exact blueprint that set the stage for the Peng 3 to enter the Baltic Sea just 1 year later. In the gray, turbulent waters of the Baltic Sea, a rusted, unassuming cargo vessel named the Peng 3 sits dead in the water. To a passing ferry, it looks like just another aging merchant ship, perhaps struggling with a fouled engine or waiting for a cheaper refueling window. But on the high-resolution digital displays of the Maritime Domain Awareness Centers in London and Brussels, the ship is a flickering anomaly. Its automatic identification system, the mandatory GPS-linked transponder, was intentionally spoofed or deactivated for a 7.5-hour window between November 17th and 18th, 2024. On the screen, the ship appeared to be 10 miles to the west, moving at 12 knots. This is a classic velocity spoofing tactic used to avoid triggering automated alarms that flag loitering near sensitive cables. In reality, it was hovering directly over a critical junction where Europe's digital lifeblood converges. The discrepancy was caught by synthetic aperture radar satellites. These satellites see the physical hull through clouds and darkness. When London and Brussels overlaid the SAR image onto the AIS map, they saw a flicker, a digital icon 10 miles away from a physical ship. If the discrepancy was caught in real time, if we could see the ghost in the machine, why was no action taken to stop the cut? The answer is a 20th century legal deadlock. Under international law, a merchant ship on the high seas is under the exclusive jurisdiction of its flag state. Without visible proof of a crime, a coastal navy cannot legally board or seize it, and in the abyss, the proof is buried under 4 kilometers of water. We watched the flicker on the radar, but we were legally paralyzed to act until the light went out. The Peng 3 event in November 2024 stands as the definitive case study for this new era of economic attrition. The vessel, a Chinese-flagged bulk carrier, departed the Russian port of Ust-Luga on November 15th, carrying a standard cargo of fertilizer. However, its trajectory across the Baltic was anything but standard. As it crossed the Swedish and Danish economic zones on November 17th and 18th, 2 of Europe's most vital data arteries, the Sea Lion one, connecting Finland to Germany, and the BCS East-West link between Lithuania and Sweden, suddenly went dark. For Western investigators, the evidence severely challenged the narrative of accidental damage. Satellite imagery and AIS playback confirmed that the Peng 3 slowed to a crawl, just 2 to 3 knots, directly over the cable coordinates. Most damningly, forensic seabed mapping conducted by Danish Navy divers and underwater drones later revealed a trenching pattern. Authorities concluded the ship's 6-ton reinforced port anchor had been lowered and dragged for over 100 miles. In the world of maritime physics, the vessel's behavior makes the accident defense a technical impossibility. A 6-ton anchor dragged through the seabed creates a drag force so immense that the ship's engines would have to work at near maximum capacity just to maintain forward momentum. To keep the vessel from stalling, the crew would have been forced to manually override engine limiters and ignore a massive, sustained spike in fuel consumption. Furthermore, an anchor of that magnitude chatters against the seabed when dragged, sending low-frequency vibrations through the hull that would be deafening in the engine room and felt in every cabin. The follow-up was a tense, month-long maritime standoff in the Kattegat Strait. The Royal Danish Navy vessel Najaden intercepted and shadowed the ship. It wasn't until late December 2024, after intense diplomatic pressure, that Chinese officials allowed a joint team from Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Germany to board the vessel. However, they were permitted only as observers to a Chinese-led inspection. They documented a mangled and twisted port anchor, physical evidence of the immense force required to snag armored cables while moving at speed. The case remains the ultimate example of gray zone tactics. While the evidence of cause is undeniable, the legal proof of intent remains shielded by plausible deniability. The Swedish Accident Investigation Authority's report in April 2025 concluded that while the ship undoubtedly caused the damage, international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, makes it nearly impossible to conclusively prove malicious intent for a commercial vessel without internal records. And the doctrine is spreading. In late December 2025 and January 2026, a fresh wave of cuts hit the Baltic, including the seizure of the cargo vessel Fitberg, intercepted by the Coast Guard, with its anchor actively deployed in the water after dragging for dozens of kilometers. This is the front line of the Shadow Fleet. These are not the sleek, gray-hulled destroyers of a formal navy. They are the deniable assets of the 2026 geopolitical landscape: aging tugs, specialized oceanographic research ships, and deep-sea trawlers that officially belong to a labyrinth of shell companies. Their primary instruments are not conventional naval ordnance. They are 20-ton reinforced anchors and industrial-grade cable-cutting hooks known as grapnels. Western defense analysts theorize a more chilling reality: that state-aligned actors may covertly influence commercial crews to deploy anchors at precise coordinates, utilizing civilian proxies to execute critical infrastructure disruptions while maintaining total legal immunity. But while the technology of the Shadow Fleet is new, the strategy of blinding an empire by severing its underwater nervous system is not a modern invention. To understand the true intent behind these cuts, we must look back over a century. In the early 20th century, the British Empire understood a truth that we are only just rediscovering: control the cables, and you control the world's perception of reality. On August 4, 1914, just hours after the outbreak of major global conflict, a shadowy figure named Superintendent Bordeaux boarded a British post office paddle steamer, the cable ship CS Alert, in the port of Dover. The ship sailed into the English Channel in the dead of night. Its mission was not to engage rival fleets. Instead, the Alert lowered heavy steel grapnels to the seabed and systematically dredged up and severed all 5 of Germany's transatlantic telegraph cables, effectively decapitating the German High Command's ability to communicate in secret. This was the first great domino of global intelligence. In January 1917, German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a coded proposal to the German minister in Mexico. Deprived of their own private glass veins, the German Foreign Office began a desperate attempt to reach their embassy in Washington by sending encrypted messages through a neutral Swedish cable. This Swedish roundabout ran from Stockholm to London and then across the Atlantic. The Germans believed that because the cable was neutral, the British wouldn't dare touch the data. They were wrong. Every pulse of light, then a telegraph signal, passing through London was being copied by the British Admiralty's Room 40 intelligence unit. The British intercepted it, and Room 40 decoded it. They discovered a terrifying proposal. Germany was offering Mexico a military alliance to invade the United States and reconquer Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. These territories had been ceded to the U.S. following the Mexican-American War in 1848. This was the final domino of the physical cut. The physical act of severing those 5 cables in 1914 had forced the German secret into a British trap 3 years later. When President Woodrow Wilson handed the decoded Zimmermann telegram to the American public, their neutrality evaporated overnight. A single cable cut in the dark had altered the course of human history and dragged the United States into the war. What we are seeing today in the Baltic and the Red Sea is a reboot of the same protocol. In 1914, they used steamships and iron hooks. In 2026, they use shadow fleets and 6-ton anchors. The goal remains identical: force the adversary off the secure, private, glass veins and into the open, vulnerable air. Whether it's forcing data onto easily jammed satellites or through terrestrial lines in hostile territory, the protocol is clear. To win the war of information, you must first break the silence of the deep.